Friday block party with Jmtowin from 1 week season. We are walking through this tricky week 4 DFS slate. We'll talk about kind of some of the macro slate dynamics, obviously a bunch of injury dominoes to sift through. We'll go position by position, identifying Jam's favorite plays for GPPs at each position. And then, as always, we will wrap up with a lineup build on DraftKings where we will use some of JM's favorite building blocks to construct a lineup to get the juices flowing as you guys head into the weekend. I'm Pete. This is the Block Party. Let's do it.
Peter's one of the greatest depositors I've ever seen.
Trust the process. Let's go.
I got auto matched with Levitan. Bullshit.
I just go the other way. In that 6v6, I win all the money. All the money.
If I had 150 lineups, I'd win too.
AP, crack spot, bullets to your head like KD. Bust it, bitch, go bust it. And I had 10 pints with me in Russia.
Hey, everyone.
All right, JM, back in the saddle. How did your week 3 go for DFS?
Pete, how did your week 3 go? Let's talk about you first.
I would rather not. I bricked out on DraftKings. I won a tournament on Underdog. Had a good day on Underdog.
I saw that. Congrats.
Thank you. Yeah, but the DraftKings, I did some onslaughts in the small field stuff, like a Derek Carr onslaught. You know, we had Shaheed as one of our ideas. I did a Texans one, and all of those failed miserably.
Yeah, I don't usually talk to my wife about DFS, good or bad, but I was talking to her this week and just saying last week was kind of I would say, like, if I compared it to my full array of 11 years of DFS play, probably like an 85th percentile week of play. It wasn't perfect, but it was pretty sharp. But like a 15th percentile week of results where my single entry 3 max, I just picked all the wrong rosters. My MME, I've had these weeks where it's like, you have all the right pieces. It wasn't your perfect week, but the right pieces line up and you win a tournament. And last week was one of those weeks where, I had double-digit exposure to basically every player who hit for a big game, but nothing that came together anywhere close. Not even like where it's like, oh man, if it had been this player instead of this player, I could have won this contest. It was like none of my rosters were close. So I had like I think negative 90% ROI in MME, which is about as low as I get in MME. So and like I said, a weird week where it's like I literally had everybody who hit. Obviously, my core bets kind of hurt things because that's how that happens, is those don't hit. But a lot of times you can still get rescued. Didn't happen last week. But it does bring up, you and I didn't get a chance to talk much before the show, but you coming on, there's like an aura of fatigue on your shoulders, it seems. And I think that we start to see that around this point in the season for most people, because most people haven't had a big hit yet. And that's something to think about if you're playing, right? Is like you have to recognize that your competition, for the most part, hasn't hit yet and is starting to feel a little bit worn down. And this is a great week to like keep that pressure up and really keep putting in your best sets of play and get those big wins that are coming our way.
Now I'm concerned that I'm getting on the presence of my aura. It looks fatigued. I did just get done with a run and a little sweaty, so that's maybe where the fatigue. No, I'm energized. I'm ready to go, Jay.
All right. Yeah, I didn't want to throw you under the bus there. Sorry about that.
No, it's funny. It is true though, because this is the time, and I know this plays out year after year too, where you'll have these like overreactions. I remember a couple of years, like the good plays, the chalk plays were just hitting over and over, and the GPP bros were down bad. And then they're like, I'm just jamming essentially a chalk cash game lineup into my tournaments. And then that's the week the chalk fails. And it's like, there is this like chasing your own tail dynamic that can happen where you don't have a uniform process that you apply to each slate, and you're just trying to react to whatever the previous week's meta was.
Yeah, I mean, we had those conversations on here of the talk in the industry, which I don't find out till I show up on here. And it's like the talk in the industry is really you should just be playing chalk now because we've gotten so efficient with predicting what's going to happen and all this stuff. And then I say no, because we, like, when you watch NFL games and understand how they develop, it is the one sport that least lends itself to prediction models. And there's just so much that goes into that and why that's the case. We won't get into all that right here, but it's like we will never get to a point where the most efficient way to win in NFL DFS is just following the projections. And so there are these things that happen on small sample sizes early in the season, and everybody wonders, oh, is this the shift that we've seen? Sometimes there are shifts, right? Like what we saw last year in the way that defenses were fighting back against offenses and how that's continued into this year. It really started 2 seasons ago and then built last year and is built even more this year. So there are places where we need to adapt, but there's also places where we need to say, okay, this is small sample size noise, and we don't want to think too much about that and continue with our our process and approach, one of the things I say on here sometimes is like, I play the way that I play. And so I know that when a week lines up for the way that I play, I'll be there when it happens. And I think that that's an important thing to think about as a DFS player is what is your style of play based on what makes the most sense to you? What does that mean in terms of the contests you should be attacking and how you should be attacking them? Because different weeks are going to play out different ways. There's going to be some weeks where literally you can say, man, I put in a great week of play and I literally never would have won this week because of the way that it played out and the way that I attack DFS. And that's part of things. I have 3 or 4 weekends like that every year where it's like, man, all that time and effort. And literally there was 100 times you could have played out this slate. I never would have won money on it because the plays that hit were just not the types of plays that I play or the approach that I take. But then the rest of the time you kind of have that shot to hit because it lines up more with the way that you play.
And that's even how I felt last week about some of those onslaughts that I rolled out. It's like if you had rolled out the Darnold, Jefferson, Aaron Jones, Johnny Munt onslaught, you would have been doing awesome. If you would have rolled out the Brock Purdy, even with Jordan Mason and Ayuk, but you included Juwan Jennings, you would have been rolling. So it's like some of those lineup building concepts. It's like you can be on the right build, but just not have the right pieces. And it is good what you're highlighting. A lot of people like me, single entry 3 max players, it's hard enough to get the combos right on just 3 rosters. You're talking about MMEing and not being able to get the combos right across hundreds of rosters. It is really hard to get it all to come together in a perfect way.
Yeah, I mean, ideally, your core pieces, the ones that you're mixing and matching the most, the majority of those core pieces hit, which is what we typically see if you kind of go back through my player grid. And it's like, who are my blue chips and my light blue chips and my high bonus plays in the player grid? There's going to be misses in there every week, but they're going to have a really high hit rate. And those are the guys I'm going to have the most exposure to. So then, you hope you hit enough of these. I had 11% Juwan Jennings. So you hope that your core hits. And then Juwan Jennings is on some of those rosters where 4, 5, 6 core pieces hit, and now you're swimming in money on the week. Instead, you have a week where maybe 15% of your core pieces hit, and that's kind of makes it really hard to put everything together. So, yeah, I mean, we have weekends like that. We turn the page, we learn from them. I think one thing we can learn from that is how quickly teams can adapt and develop from week to week, right? I mean, look at the Eagles defense. The Eagles defense had shown no signs. In fact, it was like, on paper, it was the perfect setup for the Saints in that we understood why the Saints were succeeding. We also understood why the Eagles defense had been so bad to start the season. And those reasons why the Eagles have been so bad line up perfectly with why the Saints were succeeding. And then Vic Fangio went in the lab and was like, all right, here's what we're going to do differently this week to attack this Saints defense. And it worked, right? So there's things like that we can carry over to this week as well, where we can look at some of these matchups and say, oh man, this team is this or has been this, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to continue to be the case. We see a lot of these underdog to the Broncos last week, beating the Buccaneers 24-7. We see a lot of these teams that backs against the wall, they come out and play a lot better than expected. I mean, the Jags are a team that could look like that this week where, they played Miami really tight. ETN fumbled on the 1 yard line. If that doesn't happen, they end up beating the Dolphins in week 1. They come out with this man-heavy coverage scheme. We're like, why on earth would you do that against the Dolphins? But it kind of worked. Tyreek had that one big play. They lose 20-17. And then they, lose in week 2. I forget what that game was, but it was a closer game. They didn't look as bad. And then last week, they just got absolutely annihilated. Well, there's a chance backs against the wall, 0-3 division opponent, that they come out and make a real game of it this week. And so we need to be thinking about those things as well in terms of it's not just what these teams have looked like. Belichick said it recently. I think I might have mentioned it on here last year. He said, there's so much parity in the NFL. A lot of times it's not the best team that wins. It's the team that plays best that day. And that's one of the things that we can't see heading into the games is what team is most prepared to play best that day. And so some of these games, we have to be thinking about them in terms of not just what we've seen and what that means we think will happen, but also what else could happen. And that creates a broader range of outcomes for us to play around with.
All right, let's dig into this week 4 slate. I did pull up the matchups here via OWS so we can get a quick glance at these games, some of the team totals here. Everyone has kind of circled this Commanders and Cardinals game, has the highest total of the week. Jayden Daniels coming off an awesome game on primetime. And then we have the Andy Dalton-led Panthers, who are somehow in the second highest total of the week against a Bengals team that just got lit up by the Commanders. What else are you noticing as far as this slate and any interesting games?
Yeah, I mean, those are the games kind of head and shoulders above everything else. And we've talked already just the nature of defenses right now and the way that defenses are fighting back. And, I got into it deeper on a deeper level last week in the Winner Circle podcast, but the very short of it is a lot of these teams started building 5, 6, 7 years ago for downfield passing attacks, neglecting the running back position, neglecting the run game. and defenses started playing this cover 2 and taking away the downfield shots and forcing teams to run. So a lot of these teams just weren't built to win against the style of defense that's being played right now. So when we can find places where the style of defense being played is different, like the Jags, where the Jags are playing all this man coverage, and that allows a lot of downfield passing, and actually they've been hit hard by downfield passing this week. That brings up a team like the Texans, where it's like, oh, the Texans could score a lot of points here. Or when you have a defense that's just not good, like the Commanders are probably going to be the worst defense in the NFL, at least until they shore some things up, right? Teams can adjust and players can kind of get the scheme or whatever. But right now, they are the defense to attack. And so spots like that really stand out because most of the games are going to be lower than we're used to seeing, but there could still be some spots that are higher than we're used to seeing. So definitely the two games you highlighted in the Bengals and Panthers, the Commanders and the Cardinals. I also think that Texans-Jags game is interesting because, like I said, I could see the Jags making it competitive, but I also don't know that they'll be able to hold down the Texans offense. So, they can, right? But play out the slate 100 times, there's going to be a lot of times when the Texans score points. And then if the Jags are able to keep pace, that game becomes very interesting. And then divisional games are always a little bit weird, especially really critical divisional games. So typically that means lower scoring, but every once in a while we see these divisional games that just end up popping off for higher scores. So Vikings and Packers, assuming Jordan Love returns, I think that's one of those ones where likeliest scenario is it's kind of middling to lower scoring. But there are pathways, Justin Jefferson and Jayden Reed and Aaron Jones and all these big play threats. There are pathways to that being a really intriguing game. So that's more large field play for me that I'll be kind of stacking around that a little bit. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm seeing. And on tighter builds, it's primarily, and I'm not as interested in CJ Stroud. I'll probably have a little bit of Trevor Lawrence, maybe one single entry or 3 max Trevor Lawrence roster. So I'm not as interested in the quarterbacks from that game. Main quarterbacks for me are those two clear top games in terms of over-under. So Burrow and Dalton and Jayden Daniels and Kyler Murray.
Well, let's use that as an opportunity to transition to quarterback here. And as I get this pulled up, I want to mention we have a special offer this week for everyone watching the show. If you want to try out 1 week season, JM and the crew spun up a one-off promo code. It's Pete Free, all one word. That'll give you a free weekly pass for week 4. So you go sign up a free account, put that promo code in, and you'll have access to all the great content over there on 1 week season. Of course, if you want to stick around and then subscribe, you can always use the promo code Pete for 20% off that rest of season sub. But Pete Free will get you week 4 completely free. Take advantage of that. And with that said, JM, let's start with quarterbacks here. Obviously, Jayden Daniels, Kyler Murray, they're projecting the best. They are the best points per dollar plays. They're also the most popular plays. What else is to be said about these two guys?
Well, yeah, I think that the main thing to talk about is not how they can succeed, but how they can fail. Because in spots like this, it becomes so easy to be like, oh man, you have to play these guys, or how do these guys not fail? So we saw Kyler in week 2 just had this magical game. And the two best quarterback games of the season we've seen were Kyler Murray in week 2 and Jayden Daniels in week 3. And it kind of goes back to like Derek Carr in weeks 1 and 2, where he was hitting all these downfield throws. And then we get to week 3 and he threw the ball downfield. He was 0 for 3 on downfield shots to Rashid Shaheed. Well, you connect on 1 or 2 of those, and those stat lines look really different, right? And so a lot of these downfield throws, the Anthony Richardson throw from week 1, 1 or 2 inches makes a massive difference on a throw 50 yards down the field. And so that's one of the things we want to think about is if Kyler and Jayden Daniels don't have that extra touch of magic, right, then some of those downfield throws don't end up hitting. And that's really the biggest thing that could turn this. I mean, the over-under is 50. That's high, but that's also, like a 27-23 game. And if that happens, that doesn't necessarily mean this is the game you had to have. Also, James Conner, Brian Robinson, those guys could end up taking the touchdowns in this game. So that's something to be concerned about in terms of the ceiling on these quarterbacks. So it wouldn't shock me at all if one or both of these quarterbacks ends up with 17, 18 DraftKings points. And so I think we need to be aware of that as well. It is certainly viable to fade these guys, even if you're a single entry 3 max player. It's certainly viable to fade these guys and go a different direction. You just have to understand what you're working with. I liken it, and I think I wrote this up in the player grid, that it's a little bit like my Jordan Mason takes last 2 weeks, where it was like, yes, Jordan Mason's workload is what people think. His ceiling is what people think. His chances of getting that ceiling are probably close to what people think, but also understand that his range is broader than people think. Like he has 8 points to 30 points in his range of outcomes, and that 8 points is still in his range of outcomes. So I think that's worth thinking about on these guys. And then outside of that, I mean, yes, like I said, the Commanders is the defense to attack, and there aren't many defenses to attack. So there's a chance that the scoring continues to escalate here. I mean, the Commanders haven't punted in 2 weeks. They haven't been able to stop anybody. So there's a chance that this scoring just continues to accelerate, snowball. And this is a 60-point game or 65-point game, and nothing else is more than 43 or 45 points, and you literally just had to be on this game. So there's a lot of different ways to look at it, and I think that's really the way to talk about it is, how do you want to attack this slate? Do you want to attack by betting on this game going the way that people expect, or by saying, there are pathways to it disappointing, and if it disappoints, there's going to be something else that can outpace it, and then you need something that can outpace it by enough to really, really matter, because these guys aren't going to get 10, 11 points at the quarterback position. They're going to get up in that 17-point range. So then it's a question of, can I find somebody who gets 25, 28 points, 30 points from a different game and move away from this one?
I also think Kyler and Jayden are both interesting from how you'll utilize them. With these rushing quarterbacks, there's definitely paths where they could get there just on the ground. We've seen it from Jayden, but then we also see Jayden connecting with Terry McLaurin for some big plays last week. I know we've touched on that a few times this week of how when you play kind of the naked rushing quarterback, it actually makes it a little trickier because you're having to get more things right in your lineup as opposed to if you're doing the stack. So say with Jayden, I have a feeling, the field's going to want to go back to that McLaurin stack a little bit. How are you feeling as far as utilizing these guys as part of a bigger block or potentially just rolling them out on their own?
Yeah, I mean, it was 3 or 4 years ago that I used to do a podcast with Scott Barrett, and he would bring up that Kyler Murray had hit 30 plus DraftKings points in his career at a higher rate than any quarterback in NFL history. And then there was a point, maybe it was 3 years ago, that just stopped. And Kyler, as a lot of these running quarterbacks do as they get older, started developing more into not a pocket passer, but more into a passer than a runner, right? So we see 5 rushing attempts from Kyler to start the season. Meanwhile, you've got Jayden Daniels pulled up on the screen here. And what does he have? He has, I think it's 10. I can't actually, there it is. 12, 10, 16 rush attempts. Yeah. Even more critically, look at the pass attempts. 23, 29, and 24, and put them in the context of these games, right? It's a 38-33 shootout against the Bengals where they could not stop the Bengals. He threw it 23 times. This game against Tampa, they're chasing points. They lose 20-37. He threw it 24 times. So I think that Jayden Daniels is kind of the rare instance where that quarterback naked makes more sense to me than it typically does. And like you and I have talked about on this show, that does actually, like a naked quarterback helps you less, because one of the values of getting a quarterback right is ideally you get 2 or 3 things right on your roster by getting one thing right? This quarterback has a big game. Therefore, his quarterback and 1 or 2 of his pass catchers hit. If you get just one thing right, it's not as valuable, even though the raw points are nice. So yeah, I mean, I think that downgrades Jayden a little bit for me, but not significantly. He's still my number 2 quarterback on this slate. And then with Kyler, to me, I want to have him with 1 or 2 pieces. In fact, I'm going to have Kyler doubles on all of my Kyler rosters, is how I'll be treating that this week. And Jayden, I'll have some Jayden with the pass catcher, some McLaurin, some Noah Brown. I'll also have a lot of Jayden with Brian Robinson. And this is pretty interesting. Okay, so these 2, Jayden Daniels, Brian Robinson, you put their salary together, 12.6K. What do you need at 12.6K to keep you on a 200-point pace? Just basic, way to look at things. But you need 50.4 DraftKings points from these 2 guys, okay, to keep you on a 200-point pace. This is simplistic, right? It's a reductive way to look at this. But Jayden plus Brian Robinson plus Austin Eckler, their combined points per game, 50.4. So it's like literally exactly what you need, which is outrageous in terms of how DraftKings pricing usually works. You usually see like the guys 2.5x their salary is kind of their average score. Sometimes 2x their salary is their average score. So to have this where it's like Brian Robinson is going to give up 4, 5, 6 touches to Jeremy McNichols, but he's going to get most of the work. He doesn't have the explosive, in open space ability of Austin Eckler. So we have to account for that as well. But just a really nice pairing where it's like you could get all the points. And yeah, just thinking about these Jayden pass attempts of it's going to be hard for any individual pass catcher to see 10, 11, 12 targets if they continue calling games this way, which I think they will in this spot. And so I'm less drawn toward the wide receivers. I'll have a little bit of McLaurin. I'll have some Noah Brown. But I really like the idea of just saying, let me get the touchdowns here because the running backs are involved in the passing attack too in this game. And let me get the touchdowns here and get Jayden plus Brian Robinson or Jayden naked is what I really like to do on this side of the ball.
Yeah, we saw, last week there was that quarterback running back pairing. It worked with the Lamar and Derrick Henry play. Sometimes in my head, it's hard to, like on a per play basis at the goal line, they're directly negatively correlated. But if the offense is rolling and they're having success on the ground, that can happen in both directions for the quarterback and the running back. Let's talk about those two pocket passers in that other game, because one dynamic of Kyler and Jayden soaking up all the ownership is that none of these other quarterbacks are going to be super popular or chalky. Just they're going to be naturally capped if half the field has one of Jayden or Kyler. So Joe Burrow, I'm seeing sub 10%, and Andy Dalton, way less than that. Talk about these two guys. Dalton, obviously 5,300. Joe Burrow, a little more pricey at 66.
Yeah. And what I also like about it is there's, every quarterback's going to draw some level of ownership, or almost every quarterback, and you can only roster one guy. And so there's a lot of quarterbacks on the slate that you can say, yeah, man, he can put up 20 points, but can he bury me for not having played him, right? So there's a lot of quarterbacks you can cross off your list on this slate in tournaments, and you can still be overweight Kyler, overweight Jayden, and overweight the other quarterbacks that you like, because the ownership is going to be spread out among these guys. And so, in this spot, the thing with the Bengals that I've never liked is that they're not the Bills, they're not the 49ers, they're not the Eagles, they're not a team that just tries to pile up points no matter what. So for fantasy, a lot of times we see these, they had the game against the Ravens in 2021 where they were really like exerting dominance over the division, and they just kept throwing deep into the game and putting up points. That same year they had their game against the Chiefs where they know that the Chiefs are going to be able to come back and score points, and they're just bombs away, putting up as many points as they can. And most other games is kind of like, well, if the opponent keeps it close, then we're not too worried about attacking downfield. But at this point, again, backs against the wall, they're leading the NFL in pass rate over expectation. They're playing the Carolina team that did well last week, and the Bengals don't have a great defense right now, don't have any pass rush right now. And so, yeah, this is a spot where I could see the Bengals being a little bit more attacking than they usually are in this type of setup. This is the type of setup where in the past you typically see them win the game 24-17, and they're content with that. But I think this is the type of spot where even if they hold the Panthers to 17 points, I could see them trying to score 30, 31 points and just get that offense on track. So I like Burrow quite a bit this week. Burrow to Jamar Chase, Burrow to Mike Gesicki, even Burrow to Yoshivas, who's, kind of in that Tyler Boyd role. So we know he's still going to get touches, and think about Boyd a few years ago when he was still kind of had legs and he could put up some noteworthy scores. And so, yeah, I like this Bengals offense in this spot. And on the other side, it's kind of funny. I came into this show last week a little bit down on Deontay Johnson, but my NFL Edge write-up on him was just like, how could you not play this guy? It was basically the gist of that write-up. And as we moved through the show, it was kind of like, all right, I guess kind of move back over to Deontay Johnson. Like, he's actually a sharp play, right? Was able to get onto him on my rosters, but Deontay Johnson in this spot against, Bengals defense, it's a decent secondary, but no pass rush, and they haven't been able to pull things together. I just think that this is a spot where, look, people expected the Panthers to be a lot better this year. People expected Dave Canales. They have a good offensive line this year, or at least an acceptable offensive line this year. They have better weapons than they had last year. They have good coaching. Not a lot of talent on defense, which helps us in DFS, but they have a good coach on defense in Evero. And, this version of the Panthers that we saw last week isn't necessarily what people expected coming into the season, but the expectation was like, oh, we might see a few games like this from the Panthers. So that wasn't a total shock that Andy Dalton, we even talked about it last week, right? Andy Dalton, 3-time Pro Bowler, went to the playoffs 5 times, doesn't have the great arm strength, but still has the processing ability to go out there and play football. And so, I could see this game being competitive. And one of the things that really drives decision-making for DFS players is that desire to not feel like a fish, that desire to not build a roster that you feel like you're going out on a limb and the player's low owned. Obviously, a low owned player is more valuable to us in terms of making money. But if you're like, nobody else really likes this guy, and maybe I'm wrong, and what if I play him when he has a bad game? And I'm going to feel like such an idiot. And if anybody sees my roster, they're going to be like, what are they doing playing this guy, right? Well, those are the types of plays we want to embrace. So we see these plays where Andy Dalton had this big game last week, and then people are kind of like, yeah, but that's point chasing. You can't do it again. Doesn't mean he's going to do it again this week, but it's also not point chasing. It's very much within his range of outcomes. So I'll be overweight the field on both these guys this week.
Yeah, the dynamic you just described reminded me a little bit of the Derek Carr situation after week 1, where it was like they lit up the Panthers and everyone's like, yeah, I was against the Panthers. How are they going to do against the Cowboys? I'm not buying this. And then they dropped 40 plus on the Cowboys too. The price and ownership, I thought people, like when I reviewed, we do the Swolecast First Look show on Tuesday, and I was like, people are going to be jamming Dalton. Like he's coming off this massive game going against a really bad Bengals secondary. And then you see the ownership and it's like, yeah, I think people just kind of want to play Deontay as a one-off, but man, Andy Dalton, I think you can toss in Tommy Tremble. You know, he's cheap, seeing a little bit of a role. Like there's some fun ways to double stack this.
Yeah, we always like when we can fill that tight end spot with somebody who's just attached to the offense that we're playing, and you don't have to overthink it. Not a good tight end slate. Looks like George Kittle will play, but hamstring issue, so that's always a little bit scary. And Trey McBride's going to be out, so there's just not a lot to love at the high ends of the tight end pool. And so you kind of get to that lower end, and you just say, well, let me just toss in Elijah Higgins. Let me toss in Tommy Tremble. Let me toss in one of these guys who's connected to this, Mike Gesicki, who's connected to this offense that I'm building around, and you get that spot covered, hopefully get the touchdown. That's as good as most people are going to be able to do at the position this week.
You talked about Stroud and Lawrence a little bit. Let me toss two other names at you here. Justin Fields, 5,500, another kind of rushing quarterback option. And then Caleb Williams, coming off a monster passing yardage game. He's 5,600 at home versus a Rams team who's given up a ton of passing yards. Any love for those two?
Yeah, the Fields, I'm surprised by the Fields ownership. And that's one of those, or, projected ownership. That's one of those things where people look at the name value and they know what Fields has done in the past. And you think, well, I got to get on Fields, right? Like he could have this big game. In terms of how the Steelers are playing and how they match up against the Colts, it doesn't set up as a Justin Fields game. But that said, he's definitely in my MME pool, and I'll probably be about even with the field because, again, there's a lot of quarterbacks I can cross off my list. 1% exposure, like the Field's going to have 1% exposure to this guy and 3% to this guy, 5% to this guy. That adds up to like, oh, I've got a lot of extra exposure to play around with. So Fields is one of the guys on my MME pool list. Caleb Williams is actually the one guy who could push onto my tighter builds, kind of out of this guys that we've talked about outside of those two games. Caleb Williams, honestly, like you listen to a lot of the film grinders, and he didn't look as good last week as the stats imply. He still was a tick slow on the reads and wasn't really making the throws out of structure that you would expect him to make. But those light bulbs can come on quickly with players, and it can come at a time when the buildup is there and you see it happening kind of behind the scenes, but it hasn't fully happened yet, and then it happens, right? So I really like Caleb Williams this week. He's one of those guys who there's some guys you look at them on paper and you recognize why they're a good play, and other guys you just keep being drawn toward. And Caleb Williams is one of those guys this week that my attention keeps going back to him of like, I could see this being the Caleb Williams week. And then, you pair him with somebody like DJ Moore, who last year, I have the stats in my DFS interpretations right up for this game, so I don't recall exactly what they were, but like last year he had so many games of 30 plus points, and a lot of them were on 9, 10 targets. He had like a 13 target game and a 14 target game in there, but he has 8, 10, and 10 targets so far this season. He's capable of putting up 35 points on that type of workload. And I think that people overlook that sometimes. So yeah, there's a lot of upside that could develop here, especially if the Rams and Sean McVay and Matthew Stafford are just able to figure out a way to move the ball, keep this game close against the Bears. Definitely something that could emerge there.
Yeah, and I also like that it sounds like they're going to get Keenan Allen back, which would be another kind of boost to the offensive weaponry there. We're going to move over to running back. I know we got a lot of people watching live right now. Appreciate you guys. If you're new, make sure you hit that subscribe button. JM and I broadcast these live every Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. If you guys are only catching pieces of this or need it on the go, I also toss it up on the podcast feed in a vacuum. And JM and the 1 Week Season crew have a ton of great podcast feeds as well, both some non-paywalled and paywalled options there. So check that out in your podcast app of choice. Jam, let's head over here to the running back position. We once again have some really strong plays at the top of the board. Looks like Jordan Mason is once again going to be one of the most popular plays on the slate, despite not fully getting there last week. Didn't get those touchdowns. They all went to Juwan Jennings. What are you seeing here at the top of the running back board?
Yeah, I mean, outside of Kyren Williams, I'm actually going to be hunting a little bit lower among my core pieces. I'll have some Kamara. Saquon is one of these guys who I look at him and I say, I'm okay if I lose because of not having a ton of Saquon. And what I mean by that is we look at the targets, right? 4, 5, 2. And where is his production coming from? It's coming from the 100-yard bonuses, which have been primarily based off of these huge runs, right? He got 147 yards in week 3, a 65-yard run in there. He had 109 yards in week 1, a 34-yard run in there, 3 touchdowns in week 1, 2 touchdowns in week 3. So his range of outcomes, it's not, I always think back to Le'Veon Bell and David Johnson, right? Where this was about the price tag. You got up to like 8,800 on those guys. And we got up actually in the late stages of Le'Veon Bell as high as like 9.2K. But you're talking about guys who would see 11 to 14 targets, plus the carries, plus the touchdown opportunities. And so I see Saquon as a really good play, but an overpay, as in like he can put up those 36 points. He's done it twice already, but his chances of getting there aren't 2 and 3, which is what he's shown so far. And so Saquon's a guy that I'm not arguing against, but he's not a guy that I'm going to be heavy on. You know, Breece Hall is the price tags here because people were like, oh, he's the only guy other than Christian McCaffrey that's playing all the snaps. Well, he's not, right? Braylon Allen's taking all these touches. And so these are guys where you're really betting on talent rather than workload for those high-end scores. And I tend to prefer to bet on workload at the running back positions. It's just how I've always played it. It's one of those things where when the weeks line up for the way I play the running back position, it works for me, and that's how I play it, right? And so if I lose because of that, I'm okay with that. Kamara a little bit closer on that workload range. And then Kyren Williams, what I'm seeing with him is this Rams offense, we know 2 things here. One, they focus on their best players. That's what they do, right? We've seen it with Kupp. We've seen it with Nakua. We've seen it with Kyren Williams. 2, we know that they came into the season wanting to lighten Kyren Williams' workload a little bit. We saw it in week 1 with Ronnie Rivers mixing in with him. But now that Kupp and Nakua are out, it looks like they're saying, look, Kyren Williams is our weapon that we can lean on right now. We're going to play him as much as we can. Later in the season, we can rest him a little bit more throughout games when we have other guys healthy. But I think he played 89% of the snaps last week, ceded only 2 touches to Ronnie Rivers. Blake Corum didn't play at all. So I think Kyren Williams, you know, if the Rams are going to be competitive in this game, it's going to have to come through him. So he's really the high-priced guy that I'm most drawn toward. Then as far as Jordan Mason, you know, the Patriots run defense is really good. And philosophically, their whole thing is let's force the opponent to beat us through the air. And why that works is because, again, especially in today's NFL, you have to stay ahead of the chains and drive the field. Well, for the Patriots, like, well, if we can keep them from staying ahead of the chains on the ground, then we force them into a drop back passing attack, which especially for Shanahan's 49ers is their least effective way to win. A strict, you know, not play action, but a strict drop back passing attack, 2nd and long, 3rd and long type stuff. So Jordan Mason, you know, we see the scores here. He's 6.7K. He had a 25.2, a 20.4, a 10.8. I'm not particularly scared of him burying me for not having played him, right? Can he get to 28 or 30? Absolutely. But he can do that, and I can still win without him. Also, he can get to 10, 15, 18, and I'll be pretty happy that I faded him. So I'm not too scared of Jordan Mason putting up the 35, 39-point game that would really kill me for not having him. So that's how I'm viewing Mason, and the high ownership on him is just like, to me, that's one of my edges this week. If he hits, great for everybody who played him. But if we played out the slate 100 times, I feel confident I would make money off of coming underweight or 0% Mason compared to how everybody else is going to be playing this spot.
Yeah, we talked a little bit already about Brian Robinson, James Conner. You obviously like that game environment, but it sounds like in general, you'll be going a little cheaper at running back if you're kind of not going all in on some of those top guys. You like Kyren. Who are some of the other cheaper guys who will be in your narrower builds?
Yeah, I mean, I like those 2 guys you mentioned. My running back pool isn't huge. I can actually pull up my player grid to see exactly what it is. But Najee Harris is another one who I really like this week because it looks like no Jaylen Warren, and they're going to give him, you know, at least 20 touches, but probably more than that against this Colts run defense that has been mostly bad. Obviously, they were able to slow down the Bears last week, who have no run blocking, no offensive line at all, really. But the first 2 weeks of the season, Indianapolis just got gashed on the ground, and we know that that's how the Steelers want to win. The Colts will know that that's how the Steelers want to win, but Gus Bradley's not a real game plan specific type of coordinator. We saw that against the Packers in week 2, where everybody knew how the Packers were going to try to win that game with Josh Jacobs and Malik Willis. And Gus Bradley was like, that's okay. Like, we're still going to leave 4 in the line of scrimmage, and we're still going to play our coverage and all that stuff. So yeah, I just think this is a good spot for Najee Harris in terms of his range of outcomes is anywhere from like 12 to 27. And that's kind of a lot of the running backs on this slate. And the higher price guys, it's like their range of outcomes is 15 to 30. So I'd rather just pay down and take Najee and hope that I can get those points from him. Yeah, actually, I need to pull up my list to see who else I have. Of course, some of the stuff is behind the paywall, so we can leave it for that. But Yeah, that's kind of what I'm looking at is those 6K, some of those 6K running backs, Kyren Williams, and then down at the cheaper end, actually Cam Akers, if it looks, Mixon practice today, but he's still not expected to play. So if Mixon and Dameon Pierce are both out, Cam Akers, 21 rushing yards last week at high ownership, which should keep people off them.
Yeah.
23 yards after contact. So it's just like not a good situation for him against Minnesota. It could be a much better situation this week. So I think Cam Akers is very much in play. He actually looked really good last week, better than I expected. And then down at the lower ends. So Deontay Foreman, the Browns are going to use him in games they control. We saw it in week 2. He had 14 carries. And I went through his game logs from the last couple of years with the Panthers and the Bears. And I posted this in the DFS interpretations for that game. But like he has all these games of like, 0 points, negative 0.6 points, 2 points, and then 20, 24, 30, and then back down, right? It's like when he's used for 16 plus carries, he's able to hit for a big game. And so obviously this is like large field tournament stuff, but Deontay Foreman plus the Browns defense, because that's the game environment in which Deontay Foreman ends up hitting as Browns defense dominates. I think he's interesting. And then I don't want to discount this coach speak, or I guess it's not even coach speak. It's Jeremy Fowler from ESPN saying that the Bears plan to give an extended look to Roschon Johnson this week. It's rare that we see a high-priced free agent really truly take a backseat in week 4, and the Bears don't have good run blocking to begin with. But one of the problems with DeAndre Swift is he's always looking for the home run swing, and what the Bears really need is just somebody to be like, oh, there's nothing here, let me grind forward for 2 yards. There's nothing here, let me grind forward for 3 yards. There's nothing here, let me grind forward. Oh, a hole just opened up and I got 16 yards, right? And Swift is kind of like waiting for the hole to develop, and the offensive line isn't opening any holes. So, the rumors are that they plan to give Roschon Johnson an extended look this week. He's cheap enough that if you take away position and just think about the salary you're spending and think about what you get for like a 4K wide receiver range of outcomes, he fits in nicely like at that price tag. So I think he's an interesting way to go in tournaments this week as well.
2 more I'll just ask you about, because we talked about loving that Panthers and Bengals game. Chuba Hubbard and Zach Moss both coming off of decent workload games. Any love for those two?
Yeah, I like Chuba Hubbard. Zach Moss, I mean, it's really a split backfield with Chase Brown, so I'm less interested in him. Chuba Hubbard, honestly, he's splitting a lot more work with Miles Sanders, I think, than people realize. Miles Sanders, I think, had 10 touches last week. The week before, he had 7 or 8 touches. And so, he's still involved in this backfield. Chuba Hubbard isn't getting the 90% backfield share that we've seen him get at times in the past. So they definitely need this game to stay sort of in their favor a little bit for Chuba Hubbard to get these 20 plus touches. At the same time, Bengals have not played great defense and not stopped the run well. So I think Chuba Hubbard very much in the mix.
All right, here I did want to pull up. JM mentioned the DFS interpretation. So when you guys get your free weekly pass here to OWS this week, you can head to the NFL Edge section. They got the matchups for all of these games. You get the game overviews by high, low in the team, and then you can get the DFS interpretations here from JM, where he really starts to dig in specifically here. So if you like what you're hearing today, make sure you guys take advantage where JM goes much deeper than we are able to do in just our 75-minute program here on the show. Let's head over to wide receiver now, JM.
Oh, hey, wait. I got one more running back.
Oh, you
Aaron
do?
Jones.
Oh,
there we go. I pulled up my list.
Aaron. Okay. Yeah. Okay.
Let's touch on Aaron Jones real quickly, right? Going back to, not a whole lot to talk about, but going back to Green Bay. I mean, I just think this is the spot where Aaron Jones' workload is always a question mark, right? Oh, let's keep him healthy for the stretch run. And the Vikings are doing the same thing that the Packers always did, where it's like 14 carries, 16 carries, 14 carries, 24 carries, right? So this could be one of those weeks where he sees 20 plus touches. If there is one player on the Vikings likely to score a touchdown, it's Aaron Jones. Kevin O'Connell, the player's coach. So, and explosive upside. So I like Aaron Jones this week as well as a really fun tournament option.
Yep, that is a good shout out. His role has been awesome back-to-back weeks with 6 targets and then, of course, the 19 attempts last week. Let's head over to wide receiver now. As we kind of alluded to at the top, there are lots of kind of injury situations. Nico Collins popped up with a hamstring. Deontay Johnson has a Q tag. Godwin and Mike Evans have Q tags. Marvin Harrison has a Q tag. There's a lot to sift through here, but what are you seeing at the top of the board for wide receiver? We don't have like the star power we generally do. No Tyreek, no CeeDee Lamb. So how are you feeling about wide receiver?
Yeah, my list isn't huge, and obviously all of this is listed in the player grid, so we'll skip over some of these guys, but my list isn't huge, and all the guys on my list are guys who are capable of going for all the guys on my list who cost more than 5K are capable of going for 30 plus points. And so that's really how I want to attack a week like this, is make sure that I'm getting as much upside as I can get. At the top ends, I don't have like significant arguments against Justin Jefferson or Jamar Chase, but the first guy I'm really looking at is Marvin Harrison in that game against Washington. And with Chase and Jefferson, for me, those will be game stacks only. And so Jefferson at his price tag at 8,700, it's going to be really hard for him to put up a tournament winning score without Sam Darnold at his price tag also being a quarterback that you would be really happy to have had, right? So just you take those free points that you're getting with getting the Jefferson bet correct is how I'm looking at that. Jamar Chase, he's more capable because, Burrow is priced a little bit higher. Chase is priced a little bit lower. He's more capable of hitting without Burrow, but I still want to just wrap that into game stacks this week. So for me, I'm kind of looking, Marvin Harrison can go for 30 plus points. Nico Collins can go for 30 plus points. For me, I really like the high Rashee Rice ownership at 7,300, not because he can't hit, but because his chances of putting up 40 in this game environment against a Chargers team that's, missing their left tackle and their right tackle. And Justin Herbert, if he plays, is going to be playing on this high ankle sprain. The chance of Rashee Rice going for 40 points and totally burying me for not having played him are really, really low. It's like the, some of the running backs we talked about, where it's like, yes, he can hit that 30-point score, but his chances are lower than people think. And his chance of like a 15 to 18-point score are higher than people realize. So I'm hoping that Rashee Rice, we get one of those 15 to 18-point games from him. I actually think that Travis Kelce is a really interesting tournament play as leverage. We can get into that when we get to the tight end position. But Rashee Rice is a guy I'm going to be skipping over. And then looking at guys like Marvin Harrison, guys like Nico Collins, guys like DJ Moore, guys like Stephon Diggs, especially assuming that Nico Collins is out, guys like Stephon Diggs, guys like Amari Cooper, these guys who cost less than the top end guys, but are capable of putting up, Amari did it again last week. That's 4 out of his last 10 games with Deshaun Watson. He's gone for 27 plus DraftKings points. So I got a lot of guys like that, where it's like these guys who can hit for big plays, who can score from anywhere on the field, who can see around 10 targets. And that's really where I'm going to be focused this week at wide receiver.
What is your take on Brandon Ayuk and obviously what we saw last week from Jauan Jennings? Did you have kind of, was that just a blip on the radar? Should we be concerned about Brandon Ayuk this week? Because he is projecting well again, but a lot of people are like, man, he had his chance, and Jauan Jennings was the one who seized it.
Yes, it was funny after the Juju Smith-Schuster comp last week, where it's like, how's he going to look when he's the focal point of the offense? And again, like I said last week, he's better than Juju Smith-Schuster, but it's like, that was kind of my concern when all these teams, when the Patriots were trying to trade for him and give him $32 million. It's like, well, you guys don't have an offensive line or a quarterback. And I don't know that Ayuk can be like that $32 million a year wide receiver. No, I mean, I think, especially if Kittle comes back, really, that's kind of the big key for me, is does Kittle come back? Because even though it's not Belichick with the Patriots anymore, I still expect, Mayo was on that staff for a long time. And for a long time, the Belichick MO was, we're going to put 2 guys on your best weapon. This is the years when they had Darrelle Revis, when they had Ty Law, when they had Stephon Gilmore, and now they have Christian Gonzalez. We're going to put 2 guys on your best weapon. And then we're going to put our shutdown corner on your number 2 weapon. Because like your number 2 wide receiver is not going to beat Darrelle Revis or Stephon Gilmore or Christian Gonzalez. And then we're going to have 2 guys on your best weapon. And, Belichick told a story recently about Devontae Adams' first huge game of his career. The Patriots did that against the Packers, and they doubled Jordy Nelson, and they put their best cornerback on Randall Cobb. And they were like, well, Devontae Adams is going to have to beat us. And he did, right? And then we kind of saw it in week 2 where, yes, DK Metcalf had the huge game, but if you take away that 56-yarder on the busted coverage, I think it was like 9 catches for 73 yards and no scores. And Tyler Lockett didn't really do anything, but Jackson Smith and Jigba went off for the big games. It's like when you have 3 weapons, it's really tough for the Patriots to take all 3 guys out. And then the expectation is one of these guys is going to pop for a big game. But the Patriots, one of these teams, a lot like the Vikings, with Brian Flores there, like they build less for the talent of their defense and more for the intellect of their defense. And so when you have these really smart players who are able to adapt their scheme from week to week, you can typically find a way to take out two weapons, right? Or at least neutralize two weapons. So if Kittle and Debo both miss, I'm really not that interested in the 49ers offense. And I think they'll still have a good game. I just don't think that they're going to put up tournament winning scores. If Kittle or Debo play, I think there's a pretty good chance that one of these three pass catchers hits for a big game. And with the 49ers, the question is always like, yeah, but which one? And I don't think that really changes this week. So to me, I think I made the mistake last week of I had 11% Jauan Jennings, but like 50% Brandon Ayuk, right? And it should have been closer because it's hard to know who's going to hit from this 49ers team. And so, Jauan Jennings is like an excellent number 3 wide receiver. He's not an alpha number 1 wide receiver. He's not going to put up a bunch of 175-yard, 3-touchdown games. So that's not going to happen again. But definitely like one of these 3 guys probably hits for a really nice game if they have 3 guys healthy. And that's how I'll treat it is like, okay, I have to have exposure to all these guys. None of them are priorities, but they all are going to be in the mix for me.
Let me ask you about Garrett Wilson, 6,900, massive target share through 3 games. You hear the quotes about Rodgers saying, hey, once we actually get on the same page, it's going to be special. But you also have this potential shutdown situation versus Patrick Surtain, who's been a very tough matchup for a lot of opposing wide receivers. Thoughts on the Garrett Wilson dynamic this week?
Yeah, with matchups like that, we always say the paths to ceiling are tightened up, but they're not completely erased. And we saw it with Devontae Adams. I think it was last year, put up like a 40-something pointer against Pat Surtain. So there's certainly potential. My concern is, can the Broncos offense get a bunch going here? Last week, Sean Payton was going up against Todd Bowles, who he completely dominated when they were both in the NFC South together. I heard a stat and didn't verify it, and I know it's not accurate because the Saints lost to the Bucs in the playoffs the year that the Bucs won the Super Bowl, but the stat was that Sean Payton was 9-0 against Todd Bowles. So obviously that's not accurate, but maybe it was regular season. He was 9-0 but whatever it was, like he's done really well against that Todd Bowles defense. Whereas Saleh's defense is not really like, oh, we're going to throw things at you to try to confuse you. Saleh's defense is like, we're going to do what we do and you have to come beat us. So then it's a little bit harder for Sean Payton to scheme around that the way that he could something like a Todd Bowles defense. So my concern here is like, we know that Rodgers is totally happy to win games 24-7 if his team is controlling the game and dominating. He's going to take the play clock down to 2 or 3 seconds every time, and he's going to throw the ball 28 times. So yeah, I have a hard time seeing Garrett Wilson winning people tournaments unless the Broncos keep it competitive. And I have a hard time seeing the Broncos scoring a lot of points here. So that's how I'm treating this spot. And anytime we see these players where it's like, oh yeah, everything could break their way and they can go for 30 points. That's true. And he might get 30 points and everybody who rosters him is happy with him. But I always want to look for the guys who they have pretty clear pathways to monster games, pretty clear pathways to have it games. I'm not seeing that with him. So kind of falls into that bucket of like, no, I'm not going to argue against him, but he's not on my list this week.
That makes sense. One game we haven't talked about much is that Saints-Falcons game. There's definitely some interesting wide receiver plays there. Thoughts on, Olave, Shaheed, Drake London, maybe even a little Ray McLeod as a salary saver. What do you like there?
Yeah. So what is it? I think the next time Chris Olave goes for 27 or more DraftKings points will be the first time in his career. And then Rashid Shaheed has only topped like 20.2 DraftKings points once. And so obviously his role is bigger. This offense is better now. Rashid Shaheed has been my like play him every week, no matter what guy, going back to the start of last year. But that was his price was always like low 4Ks and then salaries tight and other people aren't playing him. So what a great play when you can get 18 to 20 points out of him. Now he's kind of settled in at this 5,500 range. I look at this and I'm like, really, the Falcons are favored? Like the Falcons really, they're close to being 0-3. Sure, they're close to also being 2-1 and having a win against the Chiefs. But I don't think the Falcons are that good. They don't have a pass rush. And that's really the big issue for Derek Carr is, do you have a pass rush? Falcons are decent against the run, so that could kind of stop the Saints from doing what they want to do. But I could certainly see, and in large field play, I'll play it this way. I could certainly see this being yet another game in which the Saints put up 30-plus points, and everybody after last week is kind of like, oh, I'll stay off the Saints. So, yeah, for me, this is not going on my tighter builds, and I don't plan to isolate Shaheed and Olave as one-off plays. But I do think that this game environment is really interesting and has potential to be. We talk about, what if Jayden and Kyler finish below 20 points, and what if the touchdowns come in a different way, or these teams, make mistakes, they take a sack. It's very clear to see a way where, okay, the Cardinals get down inside the red zone and then take a sack and have to kick a field goal. And then the Commanders get down inside the red zone and go for it on 4th down and don't convert. And then the Cardinals get stopped and have to punt. All of a sudden, like, we're partway through the second quarter, it's 3-0, right? If we get one of those games, there could be another game that ascends and people just aren't on it. So I think that this Saints offense is one. And when I say they're not part of my tighter pool, that doesn't mean they can't be on a single entry 3-max roster for me. So I like this as a spot to target in that regard. And where I have this, I'll build other high confidence pieces around it, because I think it's a little bit lower confidence. And then going over to the Falcons side, Darnell Mooney has actually been the top weapon for the, he's one fewer target than Drake London so far. He's 4,400. I've always liked Darnell Mooney. He was a guy who, when he was in Chicago, he had a key to the facility and would they finally gave him a key because he would always be going there at midnight, and the security guard would have to come let him in. And he had a jugs machine in his apartment, and one of these dudes who's put in the work to be the best version of himself that he can be. Always like players like that, because you see them ascend over time and continue to get better. So Darnell Mooney as a number 2 receiver on an offense that passes the ball, I think that he has, more ceiling than people recognize or want to give him credit for. And I was sort of gratified and also disappointed to see he was drawing close to 10% ownership projections this week, because gratified because hey, it's my Darnell Mooney's all grown up. People paying attention to him. Also a little disappointed because I was I like this play at 4,400. I don't think people will be on it. But no, I think he's a sharp way to go. Even Ray McCloud, this offense is kind of scraping for a number 3 option. Kyle Pitts hasn't been creating separation at all or really getting it done. And so, I like going cheaper on this side of the ball as opposed to going up to the Drake London play.
On the cheaper front, any other kind of nice value plays jumping out to you? It just feels like we are in the desert just searching for an oasis of value. I mean, last week, obviously, Juwan Jennings hit at 4,100, but I don't know. I just feel like last year it was there was always some 3,300 guy, 3,400 guy. And I don't know. Those seem hard to come by this year.
Yeah. Did we talk about Trey Tucker on the show last week? I feel like we did.
You mentioned him briefly.
Yeah. Trey Tucker's kind of one of my weekly mentions. Of what I always say is he could go for 2 catches for 100 yards and a touchdown on 3 targets. I never roster Trey Tucker. I think he's going to get 9 targets and go 796-1. But yeah, I mean, he's in the mix. Noah Brown is in the mix in that game. It's kind of like the Gesicki or the Elijah Higgins or the Tommy Tremble thing, where it's you throw this guy on like a tight end and just say, he's part of this game environment that I like. He's on the field more and more, and we know what he's capable of doing when he sees targets. 3 targets last week. Terry McLaurin had 6 targets, right? Nobody's getting a ton of targets in this offense. So I mean, I think that he's in the mix. Trey Tucker's always in the mix. Ray McCloud is in the mix. Yosh Voss, we mentioned him already. Last week I mentioned Devon Bailey on this show. And I had about 12% Vele, and then he was inactive Sunday morning.
Yeah.
And he practiced all week. So my guess is that was a healthy scratch. So what we talked about was Vele played the majority of the slot snaps week 1 for the Broncos, had 8 targets, caught 8 balls for 39 yards. Week 2, he was out. Lil Jordan Humphrey played those slot snaps. So week 3, as soon as Vele was out, I just pivoted over to Lil Jordan Humphrey, and I'm sure I was the only person who had him. And he ended up seeing 8 targets, caught 6 of them for 37 yards.
Yeah.
So you're talking about a guy who's 3,100. That's not bad production to get. And so this is another one of those, hey, maybe Vele's active this week, and then you got to scramble before lock. But if it's Lil Jordan Humphrey who's the one who's, or I should say, Vele's inactive, then Lil Jordan Humphrey's in that slot role. He's going to see some targets, and he's just a good way to get kind of that cheap tight end type score of he's not going to win me a tournament, but he frees up salary. He can get me 6, 9, 12 points. Not going to win me a tournament, but might allow me to win a tournament by the other places that I can go.
Are there any other wide receivers? I know we kind of glossed over some of the mid-tier. You did mention some guys like Amari Cooper. We touched on DJ Moore a little bit. Any other guys that you want to mention here at wide receiver?
Yeah, I'll mention two other guys. I think that this Jags offense is one to consider: Christian Kirk and Brian Thomas Jr. I think Christian Kirk's probably going to gain a little bit of steam this week. It doesn't seem like Brian Thomas Jr. is going to. So, this talk about a team building the wrong way. Trent Balky, whatever, who, got run out of town with the 49ers, somehow got another GM job. And he's built, even though we know that teams are playing this too high, take away the downfield throws, he drafts Brian Thomas Jr. and goes out and gets Gabe Davis. He's like, here's our solution on the outside, a couple downfield guys. And then, Evan Ingram's been out and Christian Kirk hasn't been effective or wasn't effective in the early going. And it's like, they can't run the ball. They can't march the field because all of their offense is designed to go downfield. Press Taylor's got to get play calling duties taken away from him at some point soon. Probably it's got to be out of a job soon. My wife actually buys some of her makeup stuff from Press Taylor's wife. So I don't want to try to shout this guy out for, I went to high school with Press Taylor's brother-in-law. So,
wow, you're tangled web with the
random connection there. But, so I don't want to, run this guy out of a job. But yeah, it's not a good situation there in Jacksonville, but Kirk, they're going to have to use him in the short areas of the field. They're going to have to figure that out. And then Brian Thomas Jr., he's kind of a DK Metcalf type guy. And he can't run all the routes, but he can't be Malik Neighbors, right? He can't be Marvin Harrison Jr., but what he can do really well. And if they start figuring out how to use him more and more in that way, he's going to have some blow up games. So I think that being early on him or being willing to be early on him is the way to go there.
All right, we are going to move to tight end here in a second. I want to let you guys know about the rest of my DFS content schedule for the rest of the week. So here in a little over a half an hour, we'll do Off and On the Clock with the Badge Bros. If you're here watching this, you can just refresh and you should get that show on tap. We basically do a similar kind of format that JM and I do here for the DraftKings slate, but we do it for the underdog slate. So going through all the draft strategy, the scroll down gems, and we build some pick'ems to wrap it up. And that's also where the Deposit Kingdom weekly contest will drop. We'll talk some small field strategy. Then on Saturday nights for YouTube members, I have the DFS After Dark show. This week, my guest is Drew Dinkmeyer from ETR. He just launched his Welly Maker charity drive. Awesome dude. Excited to catch up with him about DFS and everything going on in his neck of the woods. And then on Sunday morning, we got the Cram. That's at 10:30 a.m. again for YouTube members. And that is a final slate walkthrough, overnight news. We process inactives. We do ownership surveys with the chat. Go through all of the plays with the final kind of news settled. So if you become a YouTube member, that's the Hand Builders and Opto Bro tier down below. You'll get access to both the After Dark and the Cram shows. Ends up being about $1 a show for the whole month because those are 2 extra premium shows. Get lots of good feedback on that. So take the plunge with us and let's take the plunge into tight end here. JM, everyone's feeling very burned at the position. We, of course, did get the big Dallas Goedert score last week, but now we have no Trey McBride. Kittle's questionable and the Njoku's out. Ingram's doubtful. What are we doing at tight end these days?
Yeah, I mean, the Dallas Goedert thing last week, right? We were on him because it was like, well, what are they going to have to do? How are they going to adjust this offense? They're going to have to get Goedert involved in the spot. I expected it to be a higher scoring game than it ended up being, which also pushed me onto Goedert. So another one of those weird ones, right? Where I had all this Goedert, all this Juwan Jennings, all this Derrick Henry, all these guys, and just literally nothing came together for me last week. But you kind of listen to people who were just really sharp, and they were talking about, well, Goedert is used this way, and he doesn't really have much upside because of the way they use him. And sometimes we have to think about not how they have used guys, but how they might use guys. So that's kind of why the Travis Kelce one to me is interesting this week. Is the usage wasn't this bad last year, but we saw kind of the 9, 10, 11, 12 point games last year, and then the random blow up games. And I just see this as one of these spots where Kansas City could say, let's get Kelce involved. So if it were just if Kelce were going to be popular, or if nobody were on any pieces of Kansas City, it wouldn't have that much value to take the risk. But the fact that Rashee Rice is expected to be so popular, one of the more popular players on the slate, and Kelce has direct leverage off of him. So for those of you unfamiliar with that type of thinking, it means because Kelce having a big game is directly taking away from an expensive, popular player, you're not only helping your rosters, but hurting a lot of other rosters, which makes the reward far greater than just a guy putting up a big game, which raises our risk tolerance, basically. So this is not something where I'm like, oh no, Kelce's a smash play. It's that Kelce's plus EV. It's that if we could play at the slate 100 times, he would make us money. Brock Bowers, not a great matchup. Cleveland, number 2 in tight end DVOA last year, FTN's DVOA metrics. Brock Bowers, not a great matchup, but still, getting all this work. And then obviously if Kittle comes back, he's another guy who can post a monster game. Goedert, I think the time to be on him was last week when people weren't on him, as opposed to this week after he had a huge game, but his ownership projections don't look that high right now. I think people are just kind of ignoring the higher priced tight end. So he's in the mix too. And that's really that's kind of what I'm seeing, right? Like I could see a little bit of Cole Kmet with Caleb Williams. I could see maybe mixing in a little Dalton Schultz because we're going to have no Tank Dell and potentially no Nico Collins. But for the most part, like those are the guys. It's like, I'll have some Kelce. I still won't have a ton, but I just think he's a really interesting tournament play. I'll have some Bowers. I'll have some Kittle. I might have some Goedert. And then I think kind of the instinct of everybody is to go cheap. I don't think that's a bad way to go, right? The edge in going a different way, and that's another edge of Kelce, is that if everybody's going cheap, then that gives you a different roster construction than everybody else, which is another way to offset your rosters from what the field is doing, clear out pathways to a first place finish. But I don't think that it's a bad idea to just follow that instinct to go cheap this week.
Yeah, and it seems to line up nicely, right? Like if you want to go with the, the Kyler and Daniel stuff, Elijah Higgins subbing in for McBride, Zach Ertz is still, in play probably at 4K. You mentioned Gesicki with Burrow. We mentioned Tommy Tremble with Dalton. You could probably even do something with like Brenton Strange, saving money on a Trevor Lawrence.
Yeah, I think
thing.
Brenton Strange, 5 and 6 targets the last couple of weeks, and obviously involved in this offense. They need to be able to throw the ball underneath.
Yeah, I love the Schultz call as well. Does seem like Dell is for sure doubtful. We already kind of mentioned the Nico thing. He's been running a lot of routes, but I mean, when you're the number 4 option on a team that has, 3 legit playmakers and wants to run the ball, you're naturally going to get squeezed. It does seem like things could clear out. I guess one more to mention who looked like he was catching a little bit of ownership. The only name we haven't said yet, Tucker Kraft. Any thoughts on him?
Yeah, No thoughts on him. I saw that he was catching ownership, and it was just like, he's not necessarily in my pool, but he's not a guy I'm afraid of him like putting up 18 points and beating me, like burying me for not having played him. So he's, look at these scores: 4.4, 3.6, 5.7. Obviously Malik Willis in 2 of those games, but there's a lot of weapons on the Packers and a really good Vikings defense this week. So no, I mean, none of these guys are likely to put up 15 plus points. So I'm not going to argue against any of these cheap guys. He's not one of the ones in my pool, but that doesn't mean that he's not as good of a play as these other ones.
Any other tight ends here? I feel like we did. We don't ever devote too much time to it.
Disservice to this position. They do a disservice to us. So no, I'm good there.
Yeah. All right. You guys know the drill. Let's head over and build a lineup with some of JM's favorite building blocks. Every week, I keep making this contest bigger, JM. The Deposit Kingdom Weekly League, $10 3 max, 900 entries, and it is already full here. So the people are hungry for these rake-free contests. I'll keep making it bigger, keep asking them to do so. But if you want to get first crack at it, I do post the link in the Deposit Kingdom Discord. That's the one spot I post the link. It's nowhere else. It's not on Twitter, not in emails. Nowhere else but the Deposit Kingdom. It's in the announcement section. So if you want to guarantee a spot, you got to be in there Tuesday, Wednesday at the latest. With how quick this is filling up, always want to chase these rake-free contests. And JM, you gave me a little sneak preview here before we went live, but let us know, where are we going to kick things off here for this lineup?
All right, so this building block is going to be called the Works. And before I give you the building block, just some interesting numbers here. So first off, Bengals split backfield. That's who played the Cardinals, or who played the Commanders in week 3. Tampa Bay split backfield, played the Commanders in week 1. And then obviously Devin Singletary week 2 had the backfield all to himself. So the Cardinals fall into this, not split backfield bucket. If we take out that middle week where the Cardinals won in the blowout, weeks 1 and 3, the Cardinals, James Conner ceded only 5 touches per game to other running backs. So you can basically say like the running back score is going to go to James Conner. So through those first games, those first 3 games of the season, week 1, running backfield plus quarterback plus number 1 wide receiver against the Commanders put together about 78 combined points. Week 2, when the quarterback was Daniel Jones, quarterback plus running back Devin Singletary plus number 1 wide receiver put up 66 points. And week 3, that combination of Burrow, Jamar Chase, and backfield put up about 92 DraftKings points. So with the price tag on Kyler Murray, Marvin Harrison Jr., James Conner, they're 20.8K combined. So anywhere in that 80-point range keeps you on pace for a tournament win. And more critically, this is something you and I kind of alluded to earlier, getting multiple spots correct on your roster is like by orders of magnitude more valuable than getting 1 spot right on your roster. So also getting 20.8K in salary right is by orders of magnitude more valuable than getting 6K of salary right at once. So the fact that the worst game from a quarterback, running back, wide receiver 1 combo was 66 points, that still keeps you on pace for about 160 points. And then you can get some upside pieces from there. And that's just like kind of your floor pieces. And 2 out of these 3 games, this would have kept you on pace for a tournament win. So the Commanders, just the way that this defense has played, the way that the Cardinals offense is likely to attack here, I think that this is a really interesting stack. And we're going to see a lot of Kyler Murray, but it seems like people don't really want to pair him with Marvin Harrison Jr. and pay up that salary. Obviously, we're not going to see a lot of Kyler plus James Conner, and we'll see very little of this 3-player stack, which is the most obvious way for this game to play out. So again, split backfields from those first and third teams that the Commanders face. But if you could have roll that into 1 running back, Chase Brown plus Zach Moss, or week 1, Bucky Irving plus Rachaad White, or, that week 2 game with Devin Singletary. You could have played this all 3 weeks. You would have been on a tournament winning pace all 3 weeks, really. And so, or at least that middle week, you would have been helped toward a tournament win. So I really like this as something that's very obvious, high floor, high ceiling. Most people won't be on. Can it fail? Yes. But if we played out this slate 100 times, this block would keep you on pace for a tournament win far more often than just about anything else you could play. And like we've talked about, most games are going to be low scoring. Most defenses are playing a particular way. Most defenses are taking away the big plays. And so finding these spots where a defense is not playing well is really valuable because we can separate in a big way. Starting point for this roster.
Yeah. And I think it's a really fun one too, because I think if people are using optimizers and say you said, all right, I'm lock buttoning Kyler and I want to use 2 Cardinals pieces with him, what does the optimizer spit out for me? You're going to get a ton of Greg Dortch. You're going to get a ton of Michael Wilson, and you'll probably get some Elijah Higgins too at tight end. So getting the 2 most expensive guys with him in James Conner and Marvin Harrison, I think naturally is going to be unique. It's something more, a hand build is going to get you on relative to the optimizer. So I love that. I guess one question here, you often talk about certain teams and games and whether you would want to play them in a game stack. With so much of the production potentially on the Washington side coming from Daniels, is this a spot where you wouldn't force another Washington piece? I guess it would really only be Brian Robinson would be a guy you'd consider here as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great way to frame that question is most of the production is going to come through Jayden Daniels, or at least that's what we've seen so far through 3 games. And so then the question is, do you force a bring back? And another thing that I'm thinking about here is all the talk all season, ever since week 1, I was talking about it, is how bad the Arizona defense is on paper, and yet they really haven't been that bad. And think about it, I mean, Jonathan Gannon's scheme is not Brian Flores' scheme, but last year, all the talk was about how bad the Vikings defense was, and we adjusted after week 1, and we're like, no, the Vikings defense is actually good, and it took the field until like week 6 or 7 to realize, this is not a defense we should be attacking. So the Cardinals defense, they held the Rams. Obviously, the Rams were banged up, but Cooper Kupp played, over 2 quarters of that game. He got nothing going. Rams scored only 10 points. Detroit scored only 20 points against the Cardinals. So I don't think it's outside the realm of possibilities that the Cardinals do really well on offense and the Commanders are not able to keep up. I think that's within the range of ways that this game could play out. So I don't need to force a bring back here. Brian Robinson is my favorite Commanders piece outside of Jayden Daniels, but that makes more sense in a spot where, the Commanders are back and forth or in control of this game. And so I don't mind doing no bring back, but we will need to save salary here, right? So I also don't mind putting Noah Brown on here as a way to say, look, let's get a piece from the other side. Let's expect that the Commanders are going to be chasing points and get Noah Brown in here because he's only 3,800, and that kind of frees up our salary a little bit. So I say we throw Noah Brown on here. I want to let you pick a defense because I'm still really I'm like, what am I doing at defense this week? And part of that's just I've written most of the player grid by this point and put in most of my bink machine rules, which I don't usually do. So I put in less time on defense. But
well, let's do one that looks kind of decent to me, and I don't know if maybe this dovetails if we do find a way to get Kyren in here, but do the Rams defense. We know Caleb Williams been turning the ball over a good bit. This seems like a game that could get kind of nutty where it's like the natural reaction is like, oh, I want a low scoring game, but it's like, just give me the pass attempts, give me shots at a turnover pick six here. Feels like that could be in play for the Rams. So I'll put them in at 2,800.
Yeah, I like that shout. And we can throw in Kyren and see if it'll work out because we can still go cheap at tight end and we don't have to correlate it to what we're doing here and still have a lot of salary left for upside in other spots. So tight end, we could throw Elijah Higgins in here and just say, hey, maybe, we get the onslaught. Maybe he scores a touchdown. I mean, Washington has been hemorrhaging yards and points. So that's not a bad way to go. Or we can move away from this game stack and just throw in one of the other cheap tight ends that we like in this spot. We could throw in Brenton Strange or somebody else. I'll let you make the call on what we do with the tight end position. And then we can see our salary from there.
Yeah. Why don't we just, you just said Strange. It's the name you most recently said, 3,100. Let's put that in and we can come back and revisit tight end once we figure out the last wide receiver flex spot. We do have 6,100 remaining here. So that's going to put us in a pretty nice zone. You could definitely go to like a Deontay Johnson and then get up at that other spot. Or you could go split it a little bit more down the middle. What do you think? Yeah,
actually, I really like that. Let's throw in Deontay Johnson, which is going to get us, let's go ahead and say that I want to say Nico Collins doesn't play, or even if he does, let's remember that this team produced like 30-ish plus points in 9 out of 17 games last year for their wide receivers. And this year they've been spreading that among 3 wide receivers. I mean, Tank Dell hasn't been super involved, but still like those extra targets are being funneled away. Whereas now we're going to be down to 1 or 2 guys. So if Nico Collins is out, Diggs is going to be one of my favorite plays on the week. But even if Nico plays, I'm going to have more Nico than Diggs, but I'm going to have more Diggs than the field is going to have this week. So I think throwing Diggs onto this roster is a nice way to go. As well, it ties in with our Strange play.
True.
And then really the only play that we have on here that's not super correlated is that Deontay Johnson play, but we're betting on roll. We're betting on a game environment that we like. And another thing I want to mention here is if you start out with this Kyler, Marvin Harrison, James Conner stack, because the bet that you're placing is these guys are going to score 75 combined points, 80 combined points, maybe even 85 to 90 combined points at low ownership, low combinatorial ownership. Most people won't have this 3-player stack. You really don't have to get too strange. We've got Strange on this roster. You don't have to get too strange away from this stack. You can play things pretty straightforward away from this stack because you're going to be so unique and it has enough point potential that it can be a true separator for your roster. So Deontay Johnson is going to be somewhat popular. If Nico Collins is out, I'm sure Diggs will be popular. Kyren Williams might draw some attention, but just like the way this roster is set up from a strategy standpoint, what gives us a path to first place, we really don't have to worry about that ownership once we've started out with the way that we started out. It's another thing that I like about that building block this week.
Yeah, and I will know, I did just see reported about 20 minutes ago, Nico Collins saying he's good to go for Sunday, but I'm completely with you. I don't think that changes anything for Diggs. I just quickly pulled up the Fantasy Life utilization report. Stephon Diggs still has an awesome role in the offense. Obviously, Nico is really blossoming into just a true stone cold superstar the way he's being used. So it's great to see that he's going to be in play. But yeah, I'm interested in Nico. I'm interested in Diggs. I'm interested in Schultz this week. I think it's going to be a fun spot to attack. And then, yeah, you could mess around like with the combos, like you said. If you did like the Higgins thing, I guess he's the exact same price, so you don't save any salary there. But certainly some kind of 2v2s you could play around with here. But I love how this fits with the Diggs, Deontay here, in Marvin Harrison. This is a fun lineup.
Yeah, I mean, we got a lot of ceiling, and this is what on a week like this, especially if I'm taking Noah Brown can go for 20 points, but he's probably not going to. Brenton Strange can go for 12 to 15 points, but he's probably not going to. But on a week where I'm doing something like this, I want to be able to look through the rest of the roster and say, okay, Kyler, Connor, Harrison can combine to average 30 points apiece. They're not quite as good of a combo as that Bengals. You got Burrow, who's a more seasoned veteran, a better quarterback than Kyler Murray. You got Jamar Chase, who's a step ahead of Marvin Harrison Jr., obviously, in terms of elite wide receivers, but still, like, they're capable of putting up 85 to 90 points. We've seen a team do that already. We've seen a lesser team do that in week 1, putting up 78 points. And then you've got Kyren Williams can put up 30 plus. Deontay Johnson can put up 30 points. Stephon Diggs can put up 30 plus. And so being able to go through the roster and say, okay, yeah, there's a lot of ceiling on this roster. And if everything hits, you could, on a week like this, where kind of that 90th percentile of scoring could be kind of low, you could totally blow away the competition and be competing against very few other rosters for a first place finish.
Yep. And chat mentioning, Ertz revenge game. That's another way you could certainly put Ertz in here and maybe go a different spot. Noah Brown, if you have another punt play. As always, this is to get you some ideas, show you how some of these blocks could fit together. And again, we are recording this on a Friday. Schmohawk asking about Deontay's groin and being limited today. Yes, all of this stuff is always.
It's a Friday, like Pete's saying, and also specific to Deontay, he seems totally unconcerned. But realistically, like, I do all of my research-based content, write-ups, thoughts heading into Friday. And then on Friday night, I switch over to like really building and getting a feel for the slate. And I find new things, right? So Saturday, late Saturday night, early Sunday morning is when I give my update on my player grid, which is kind of my final exposures on my player pool. And that's where kind of like my finalized thoughts are. We're gonna have a lot more information throughout the weekend, but like Pete said, a big part of this is exercising that muscle of how we build rosters and how we think through, again, like we talked about last week. It's rare that you're going to win a tournament just by picking players. It's about what's the strategy? What are you thinking about in terms of how you're clearing out pathways to a first place finish? And so we want to talk about those types of things as well, the strategic side of DFS and how we're targeting those tops of the leaderboards finishes.
Yeah. And I think the name of this show is literally called The Block Party, a spin-off of the building blocks thing. But so many weeks this season, we've already seen that block thesis be so true. The lineup I won, my underdog lineup, was a Jalen Hurts, where he didn't do anything last week, but I built a block around him, Saquon Barkley, and Dallas Goedert. And that combined block was able to give me enough points to win, even though one of the pieces was disappointing. Obviously, in these larger field DFS contests, you're going to need to be more perfect. But we saw last week, there were lots of Kyler McBride stacks that were winning tournaments because it was able to get them on the other important pieces of the block. So or to other blocks that ended up hitting. So I do love the idea of concentrating your bets here, getting less things right. And I want to mention one more time, we got the free week here on 1 week season. If you guys have never checked it out, this is the opportunity to do so. You get a free account. You sign up with promo code PETEFREE, all one word, PETEFREE, and then you can get the keys to the kingdom for the week. Anything else, JM, I have forgotten to mention here on this show?
No, just to clarify, go to like you're going to purchase a week pass and just put in that promo code and it'll take the money off and you get a free week pass. So check it out. And again, like I mentioned last week, a lot of the NFL Edge game breakdowns, a lot of that content is free. Some of the content in the scroll is free. So even if you just have a free account on OWS, there's a lot of good research content that you'll have access to for preparing. Our goal is not to give you plays or to tell you how to build your roster that week. Our goal is to give you enough information and training that you can build really sharp DFS rosters. And so a lot of that research information is available for free every week. Is just a good resource for those of you who are just looking for a way to not pay for a subscription, but just kind of have access to deeper dive research each week. And again, Pete free, you get that free week pass. Lasts for 7 days. So you sign up on, Friday night, Saturday morning, you got it through a big chunk of next week as well.
Ooh, there it is. A little game theory. How late can you push it to then try to get next week's? Yeah, there you go. Go ahead
and game my system.
Yes, do it. All right. Appreciate you guys hanging out. In 10 minutes, we will be live for Off and On the Clock, running through the underdog slate. Thank you to everyone in the chat watching live. Thank you to JM. Check out 1 week season with Pete free this week. And we'll see you guys next time and hopefully at the top of the leaderboards. Peace.